$2,400,000,000. That is the amount of money the United States of America spends on its military every single day. Every 24 hours, while American roads crumble and small towns in the heartland go bankrupt, the American taxpayer is footing a bill that stretches across the Atlantic. For 75 years, this money hasn't just protected America, it has served as a silent, invisible subsidy for the most luxurious social experiments in human history. While American families struggle with the skyrocketing costs of private health insurance and student debt, Germany has built a world-class system of free healthcare. France has offered nearly free university education to its youth. Scandinavia has perfected a social safety net that allows for early retirement and month-long vacations. None of this would be possible without the American soldier, because for 7.5 decades, Europe hasn't had to worry about its own survival. They outsourced the dirty work of defense to Washington, used the savings to build a utopia, and then had the audacity to lecture America on its lack of social progress. It's not just an opinion, it's math. Today, we are going to look at the numbers European leaders have spent decades trying to hide. We are going to look at the betrayals, the broken promises, and the absolute decay of European military power, a decay so profound that German soldiers have been caught using painted broomsticks in place of machine guns. And finally, we will look at why the era of asking nicely is over. Donald Trump isn't just complaining about the free ride anymore, he is ending it. To understand the present, we must look at the wreckage of 1945. Europe was a graveyard. 50 million dead, economies erased. The great powers, Britain, France, Germany, were no longer powers at all. They were dependencies. America could have walked away. We had won the war. We had the world's only nuclear weapons. We had the strongest economy on Earth. Instead, we stayed. In 1948, we launched the Marshall Plan. We sent $13.3 billion, worth over $170 billion in today's money, to rebuild the very countries that had just burned the world down. We rebuilt their factories, their bridges, and their power plants. We didn't ask for interest, we didn't demand ownership, we just gave it. In 1949, we signed the North Atlantic Treaty. NATO was born. The deal was simple. America would provide the muscle to keep the Soviet Union from swallowing Western Europe. In exchange, European nations promised to rebuild their own militaries and eventually carry their own weight. The benchmark was set at 2% of their gross domestic product. That was the entry fee for the most powerful security umbrella in history. Europe broke that promise almost immediately. As soon as their cities were rebuilt and their shops were full, the urgency to defend themselves evaporated. They realized that as long as American bases were in Germany, Italy, and Britain, they didn't need to spend money on tanks. They could spend it on 35-hour work weeks and generous pensions. While the U.S. poured over $14 trillion into defense since the start of the Cold War, Germany, the richest nation in Europe, spent decades hovering around 1.2% of its GDP. They had the money, they just chose to spend it on themselves, knowing the Americans would never leave. If you want to see the result of 75 years of neglect, look no further than the current state of European militaries. It would be a comedy if the stakes weren't so high. In 2014, during a NATO joint exercise in Norway, German soldiers from the 371st Panzer Grenadier Battalion made international headlines for all the wrong reasons. They didn't have enough machine guns. They didn't have enough handguns. They were missing 75% of their night vision goggles. Their solution? They took wooden broomsticks, painted them black, and taped them to the top of their armored vehicles to simulate barrels. This is the army of the most powerful economy in Europe. This is the country that is supposed to be the engine of the European Union. But Germany isn't alone. In Britain, the Royal Navy, once the master of the seas, struggles to find enough sailors to crew its 2 aircraft carriers. The British Army is currently at its smallest size since the era of Napoleon. In France, their flagship aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, has become a running joke for the amount of time it spends in dry dock for repairs. When the European Union combined claims to have 1.3 million active troops, it sounds impressive on paper, but when you look at the readiness reports, the truth emerges. Only a fraction of their tanks can actually fly. Only a fraction of their planes can actually fly. NATO's own internal simulations show a terrifying reality. If Russia were to push into the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, they would reach the capitals within 60 hours, 2.5 days. In that time, European leaders would still be in emergency meetings, arguing about which committee should be formed to discuss the response. The only thing, literally the only thing stopping a total collapse of European security is the presence of American air power and the American nuclear deterrent.
The year was 2011. France and Britain decided they wanted to lead an intervention in Libya to remove Muammar Gaddafi. They called it a European-led operation. They wanted to show the world they could handle their own backyard without the Americans holding their hands. It took exactly 2 weeks for the mighty European powers to run out of ammunition. 2 weeks. Against a country with no modern air force and no ability to fight back, the British and French militaries ran out of precision-guided bombs. They had to call Washington, hat in hand, and beg the Obama administration to resupply them. They couldn't even finish a small-scale bombing campaign in North Africa without American logistics. This is the same Europe that lectures American presidents on reckless foreign policy, the same Europe that frequently undermines American interests at the United Nations. Remember the Iraq War? Whether you agreed with it or not, America asked its allies for support. Britain stood by us, but France and Germany didn't just stay home. They actively lobbied the world to humiliate the United States. They took the security we provided and used it as a shield to stab us in the back on the global stage. They wanted the protection of the American military, but they wanted the moral high ground of being pacifists. It was a luxury paid for by the blood and treasure of the American taxpayer. Let's talk about the ultimate insurance policy: nuclear weapons. In a world without the United States, Europe is a nuclear midget. Russia possesses over 5,000 nuclear warheads. They have spent the last decade modernizing their delivery systems, building hypersonic missiles, and training their troops for tactical nuclear warfare. Europe has France and Britain. Combined, they barely have 500 warheads. But it's not just about the numbers, it's about the will. Does anyone in their right mind believe that France would launch a nuclear strike on Moscow to save Estonia? Would Britain trade London for Vilnius? The answer is an obvious no. American nuclear deterrence works because our reach is global. We have the triad: submarines that can strike from anywhere, bombers that can bypass any radar, and silos that can hit any target in 30 minutes. We have spent trillions to ensure that no one, not Russia, not China, dares to test the Article 5 commitment. When Europe talks about strategic autonomy, the idea that they don't need America, they are living in a fantasy world. Strategic autonomy would require Europe to build a nuclear force 5 times its current size. It would require them to build their own satellite GPS systems, their own heavy-lift transport planes, and their own massive intelligence networks. They haven't even been able to agree on a single type of tank for the last 40 years. The idea that they could build a unified military is a pipe dream. Now we come to 2026. The world has changed. The soft complaints of previous presidents like Obama and Bush have been replaced by the hard reality of Donald Trump. Why is Europe panicking over Greenland? It's not just about land, it's about the shift in power. For decades, the Arctic was ignored. Today, it is the new frontier of global competition. Russia and China are moving in, and Trump has recognized that Denmark, the country that technically owns Greenland, cannot defend it. Denmark spends less than 1.5% of its GDP on defense. They have no way to protect their own territory in the Arctic. When Trump talks about acquiring Greenland or placing it under American management, he is highlighting the fundamental truth of the 21st century. If you can't defend it, you don't really own it. Europeans are screaming about international norms and sovereignty, but where were those norms when they were buying Russian gas and funding Putin's war machine? Where was that sovereignty when they were outsourcing their manufacturing to China? Trump is treating Europe like a client, not a partner, because that is what they have become. They are dependents who have forgotten that their survival is a gift, not a right. By threatening tariffs on Denmark, the UK, and France, Trump is using the only language European elites understand: money. He is making it clear that the American market is no longer open to countries that won't pay their fair share for the security that makes that market possible. For 75 years, the debate in Europe has been butter: more pensions, more health care, more vacations. In America, the debate has been guns. We spent the money, so they didn't have to. But the butter is starting to melt. The European economy is stagnant. Germany is facing its worst industrial crisis in decades. The population is aging. They don't have the money to fund their welfare states and rebuild their militaries. They are trapped. If they choose guns, their people will riot over the loss of social benefits. If they choose butter, they remain defenseless against a resurgent Russia. They have spent 3 generations avoiding hard choices. They assumed the American ATM would always be open. They assumed that no matter how much they insulted us, no matter how many trade deals they tilted in their favor, the American soldier would always be there to die for them. But Trump has finally called their bluff. The foreign policy establishment in Washington is horrified. They talk about abandoning our allies. But are they allies if they won't fight for themselves? Are they allies if they run out of bombs in 2 weeks? Or are they just expensive hobbies? The American people are starting to ask these questions. Why are we spending $886 billion a year on defense when our own borders are wide open? Why are we protecting the borders of countries that won't even buy our products without massive regulations?
We are at a crossroads. There are 2 ways this ends. Option 1, Europe wakes up. They realize that the 75-year holiday is over. They stop the lectures, they stop the excuses, and they start writing checks. They build a real military, they raise their retirement ages, and they become a true partner to the United States. This would take decades. It would be painful. It would require a level of political courage that hasn't been seen in Europe since Churchill. Option 2. They keep waiting. They keep hoping that Trump is an aberration. They keep giving speeches at Davos about the rules-based order while their tanks rust and their ammo depots sit empty. And then, one day, they will face a crisis that Washington won't solve. Maybe it's a push into the Baltics. Maybe it's a collapse of the Mediterranean border. Maybe it's a total energy blockade. When that day comes, they will pick up the phone to call the White House, and for the first time in nearly a century, no one will answer. They will discover what it actually means to be alone. Donald Trump isn't being radical. He's being rational. He is looking at a business arrangement that is 75 years old and seeing that it's a bad deal for the American people. The free ride is over. The only question that remains is whether Europe realizes it before the lights go out.